And the handout for today, if you came in late, is on the back thing right there. And today we're going to be learning about the Baal Shem Tov. Does anybody know about the Baal Shem Tov? Want to share what they know right off the bat? You've heard about the Baal Shem Tov.
He started the Hasidic movement.
He started the Hasidic movement. Yep. We're good. I don't need to thank you though.
I know he's known for wise sayings and for his wisdom in general. One that was passed on to me was, the world is filled with miracles, but we walk around with blinders, or something like that.
Yes, he was famous for his wise sayings. Also, you might also be thinking, though, I think the one that you're thinking of is Rabbi Nachman, who of Bratslav, who's a descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, and he was very famous for his little quotations and sayings. So the Baal Shem Tov was a real person, and the words Baal Shem Tov mean the master of the good name. Baal means master. It happens to be on the back. Baal means master. And just anecdotally, it also people means, in modern Hebrew, husband. Baal is a husband also, so just so that you know. And historically, Baal comes from the name of the Canaanite deity who was worshipped in the land of Canaan before the Hebrews, before the Jewish religion came. Baal was a Canaanite deity. So Baal means master, and Baal Shem Tov means master of Shem, name, Tov, good. His real name was Israel ben Eliezer, Israel son of Eliezer, and he was a real persona. He was a real person who lived was born in 1700 and died approximately in 1760. 1762, it's a little hazy exactly when he died. He lived in the part of the world that is now the Ukraine, and he was born in a small shtetl, a village called Oka, and there are many stories around his origin which of themselves are mystical and magical. So hello everybody. The handouts for today there's some on that credenza right there, and we're talking today about the Baal Shem Tov. So I'll let you guys get settled a little bit. Thank you. Okay, so around his origins and his birth, there are many, many mystical legends, and as we said earlier, someone said, the Baal Shem Tov is known as the father of the Hasidic movement. What exactly is the Hasidic movement? What's a Hasid?
Well, it's a religious.
You got to speak up, remember, because it's being taped.
They're a religious sect, but they worship through joy, through song, and it was, I think, in a kind of opposition to that only the literate and only the people who are scholars could practice or understand the religion.
That's exactly right. The Hasidic movement began as a response to really Talmudic book learning style of Jewish practice. And it was an attempt, an effort, and a successful one, because we know it still persists today. And in fact, many elements of Hasidic type of Judaism have been interwoven into modern Judaism. It was an attempt to bring Judaism back to the everyman, because people were very poor in Eastern European Jewry. They lived in these very poor villages, as we know. Of course, there were people who had money, we know that too, but there were a lot of poor people who did not have the funds for education, who could not devote their time to Torah study and Talmud study, And it, as we talked about this a little bit last week, it created kind of a hierarchy in the communities, with the rabbis being the creme de la creme, very tippy top, and often rabbis have been appointed by the local government, by the Polish or Ukrainian or Russian, wherever they were, government to kind of oversee the little town, the little village. And so it created kind of a division between the everyday person and the very, very learned people. So the Hasidic movement was an attempt to bring Judaism back to the level of the common person, and so its emphasis was on worshiping God with joy and finding God. A main idea of the Hasidic movement was that God is everywhere. God is everywhere. God is in a leaf on a tree, and a blade of grass, and a mouse in his hole. God is everywhere. I know. I hope we're not. It's a Jewish mouse. Yes, and God is in us, not only in us, but in a horse, in a cow, in every element of, even in rocks, and the very air we breathe. The idea of Hasidic Judaism was that God is everywhere, and so if God is everywhere, worshiping God is accessible to everyone. That you don't need to be a big Torah, a very learned Torah scholar. And there are many, many parables. I don't know if you remember back in the beginning of this class, I told you the story about the little boy who brought his flute to Yom Kippur services and played his flute because he couldn't speak, and that was how he worshipped. You all remember that story? So that's a classic Hasidic story, because it illustrates that you can worship God in many, many different ways, and you don't only have to be a very learned, serious Torah scholar. And it also taught that worshiping God through joyful expression, that is really appreciating life, really appreciating the world, really appreciating the gift of being alive, is a way of worship in itself. And the Hasidim were famous for their dances and their songs and their storytelling, as opposed to what had become a very traditional mode of practicing Judaism, a very serious Torah, Talmud study in the study houses, in the synagogues, that was not always accessible to all people. So the movement itself, in its day, which was in the early to mid 1700s, was extremely controversial, kind of like Reform Judaism probably was when it first came out. The traditional community did not think that it was appropriate. They thought it was unseemly for people to sing and dance like that, especially on the Sabbath, which was supposed to be solemn and serious. And there was a lot of division within the Jewish world about whether the Hasidic movement was appropriate form of Judaism or not. So who saw, just on the aside, who saw the play Soul Doctor, the musical Soul Doctor?
Was that wonderful?
So I thought it was wonderful too. I enjoyed it. I went to see it, and I know not everybody did, but there's a perfect example of that sentiment carrying on even into modern times. That Rabbi Karlbach's father, Shlomo Karlbach's father, was a very traditional rabbi. The cantor was very traditional, and was really opposed to the Hasidic movement, to which both of his sons eventually turned, and Shlomo Karlbach becoming a famous Hasidic rabbi for his music. So that sentiment still prevailed, and I do believe actually that in some instances it still prevails today. Kind of an opposition between very traditional Judaism and more progressive ways of looking at Judaism to fit into the mold of to fit into the society of the day. I think that that's still something that the Jewish people struggle with. But for its day, the Hasidic movement, which now we think of, well, they're the real traditional ones wearing their stroimels and their black hats in Borough Park. They were the rebels of their time. They were the rebels of their time. And they were led by Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, otherwise known as the Baal Shem Tov, and also known by an abbreviation of the first letters of his name, the Gecht. And very devout Hasidic people will call him the Gecht rather than Baal Shem Tov. So, as I said in the beginning of today's lecture, the Baal Shem Tov, his very origins are shrouded in mystery and have mystical, magical tales associated with them. So here is the story of how the Baal Shem Tov came to be. His father was a learned man named Eliezer, and he was married to a woman named Sarah. And they lived in this small village that I told you of Okup that was in the Carpathian Mountains, which was then, which is now the Ukraine. I think then it might have been part of Poland, but a little backwater mountain town. And at that time, the Tartars were coming through the mountains, and they attacked the shtetl of Okup, and they kidnapped Eliezer, who was the Baal Shem Tov's father. Baal Shem Tov was not born yet. They kidnapped Eliezer. They rounded up all the men in the village, of which Eliezer was one, and shipped him off, sold him to slavery into the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire also was extending into that part of the world at that time. And for many years, Eliezer was a slave in the palace of a prince, of a vizier of the king. It doesn't say who, but it seems to be maybe in the Turkish Empire, Ottoman Empire. And it was recognized that he had an unusual intelligence. He was a very learned man. And so rather than just being a common, house slave, he was called upon sometimes. His master would ask his opinion and his advice. And he actually helped the vizier advise the king in a way that eventually wound up with the king winning a very important battle. And so when that wartime gain was had and credit was given where credit was due, the king rewarded Eliezer with his freedom and also one of his daughters, one of the princesses, in marriage. So Eliezer had been in slavery now for several years. He did marry the young girl, but the story says he did not have marital relations with her. And because he was married, he remembered his wife Sarah back in their village in the Carpathian Mountains. And when she asked him, "Why aren't we together as husband and wife?" he said to her, "Well, I'll confide in you. I'm a Jew and I'm married," and he told her his story. And she subsequently helped him to escape and gave him money and a boat and helped him to escape. He was pursued by the king's men. He gave back the money, but in the end they allowed him to go back home. And he made his way home to the Carpathian Mountains. And the story goes is that on his way home, which was an arduous journey, he ended up, off the boat, stumbling home through the forest, half naked. And in the forest, he came upon Elijah the prophet. And Elijah had been sent down from heaven to tell him that when he got home, he and his wife would have a son. So, of course, Eliezer is older by this time, and his wife was older, but he was a very pious man, and he went home, and 9 months later, lo and behold, Israel, their son, was born. Sarah, the mother, died in childbirth, and the father, Eliezer, lived until the boy was 5, at which time he passed away. And on his deathbed, he said to Yisrael, to his son, "Don't fear anything but God. You are a special soul, and you have nothing in this earth to fear except for God." And he passed away. So that's the story of Yisrael ben Eliezer, the Baal Shem Tov's birth. Let me ask you a question. Does this story sound familiar to you at all?
Yeah.
In what way? What story does it remind you of?
Sarah and Abraham.
Abraham and Sarah, exactly, right? So it's, like I said, these stories have been passed down orally. He was a man who was so revered and ended up having so many followers, which he still has today. That's, it still has many, many followers today. That his origin stories have become, these mystical legends in themselves. And of course there are parallels with the Abraham and Sarah story. Not only that Eliezer was very old when he was stumbling home, not only that Elijah himself came and visited with Abraham, the 3 angels came and visited, not only that Sarah was very old, but that he was a special soul, as was Isaac, who was destined to go up to Mount Moriah to be sacrificed by his father, which we know didn't happen, but he was a special soul. Also elements in there too of wandering. Abraham wandered between his home in Ur before he got to the land of Canaan that God had promised him. Eliezer wandered. Also, another element in the Abraham and Sarah story, that if you recall, one time Abraham went into Egypt, and rather than tell the Pharaoh that Sarah was his wife, he told Pharaoh Sarah was his sister, and created all kinds of things. So again, in a palace with a princess, with the royalty. So all of those, the story of Yisrael's birth, which is a very well-known story, has been blended in with stories from the Torah and from the Tanakh, to make it, a part of Midrash Agadah, which I've told you before. Midrash are the behind-the-scenes stories of Torah learning. So, Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer was elevated through these stories to a position of being a character as revered as a character from the Bible, from the Torah, through these kinds of stories which elevated him to a midrashic level. So the story goes on. Does anybody have questions before I go on? Okay. So the story goes on. Here is Israel. He's a little boy. He's 5 years old, and he's an orphan in the world. What happens to orphans in those days? Well, in those days, the town took care of their orphans, and he was raised by the people in the shtetl. He was educated. He lived in different homes of different people, and he went to school with the other children. And the story goes that Yisrael was not your ordinary student. He could not sit still and read a book. Sounds to me like he had a learning. Today we'd say he'd have an IEP. He was, we have multiple intelligences. He was a different kind of intelligence. So he could not sit still in the classroom and concentrate. And he got up out of class, and he would go out and wander in the woods and in the fields and, be in nature, and then come back. And the teachers were like, the kid is, he's an imbecile, he's not smart, he doesn't have the ability to learn what to do, he's harmless enough, he's a good boy, we'll let him do his thing. And he was known for leaving and wandering, playing outside all day. So the Hasidic tales say that actually when he was outside, this is when he was developing his theory and his idea that God is everywhere, that God is miraculously, in the brooks, in the sky, in the birds, in the trees, and he could see past the mundane and everyday to realize that God was everywhere. So eventually he grew up, he became a bar mitzvah, and after that his official learning, school book learning was done, and they made him assistant to the teacher. And his job was to go around to the houses every morning and pick up the children and bring them to school. So, and of course they're coming on foot. So he would get up in the morning and he'd knock on the door and pick up the children, and they would walk together to school. The story goes that Yisrael was not your ordinary teacher's assistant who would just pick up the kids, go straight to school. No, he would take the children on a circuitous route, all that would take them through fields and forests, and he taught them songs along the way, so that while they walked to school, they were singing in praise of God on their way to school. And he would take them home the same way, teaching them songs, walking their way through the forest. And as they would pick flowers and put flowers in their hair. They were the original flower children. They were. And one day, when they were coming home from school at dusk, out of the woods, there came a wolf. They were attacked by a wolf. Now, does anybody know this story? Am I telling you a story that you know? They were attacked by a wolf. And of course the children were very, very frightened, and they all ran home very scared. And of course the parents were like, that's it, Yisrael, you can't take the kids through the woods anymore. We're not letting them go with you. We want a different, teacher assistant. We don't want you taking our kids. You're going to walk them through with the wolf. Yisrael pleaded and convinced the parents, listen, it was just a wolf. He was more scared of us than we were of him. He ran off, nothing to be afraid of. Please trust me, I'll take the children. Well, the story goes is that it wasn't an ordinary wolf that came out from the woods. Of course not, because it's a Hasidic story, right? It was a werewolf. A werewolf. A wolf in the body of a man who was a lone woodcutter who lived in the woods and was a tortured soul, a werewolf. Satan saw Yisrael bringing the children to school every day and back home and singing and putting joy in their hearts, and Satan didn't like it. So he went to God and he said, look at this character Yisrael. He's making all these kids happy. The children are singing. So Elijah said, so what? The children are singing. What's the matter with you? Remember, Satan is an angel also. He happens to be the angel who embodies evil, but evil is also part of the world. Satan says, well, he's getting in my way. I can't do my work because he's teaching these children joy. So Satan said, let me do something about him. And God said, all right, go ahead, try. Satan entered the heart of the werewolf. The werewolf, and the next day after Yisrael had convinced the parents to let him take the children again, the werewolf goes to attack. Yisrael, who, because he was one of those mystical people who could see beyond everything and see the unity of God in everything, was not afraid of the werewolf. He told the children, wait right here in the forest, and he walked right up to the wolf, reached into his chest, and tore out his heart. So in his hand, he held this heart, which the story says was as black could be. So black that it was almost like a mirror, that you couldn't see anything in it but the black. And Yisrael could have squeezed that heart, which if you remember was actually Satan's heart, not the werewolf's heart, squeezed it and killed it and done away with it. But in his infinite wisdom, he already knew that evil is as much a part of this world as is good, and that evil is a part of the flow of the universe. And so rather than destroying the heart, he put it down on the ground and it was swallowed up by the earth. And of course, the next day, the townspeople found the woodcutter who had lived by himself in the forest, dead, alone under a bush in the forest. What?
A little red.
Right.
Snow White.
The one that, and also they were gonna take someone's heart out and bury it.
That was Snow
Snow
White,
White.
right? So,
Edgar Allan Poe.
right, Edgar Allan Poe. So,
Wasn't it so?
I read recently, and I don't remember where, that there actually was a sect of people that believe, and may have done this, I don't know if it's legendary or not, that they actually sacrificed human beings at certain times. There was a period when people were sacrifices. Is this lore or not? I'm reading a couple of books now. One of them is,
Never in Judaism.
no, not in Judaism. I'm not speaking about
But
Judaism.
different cultures at certain points in their
Yes, did you
had
ever hear
religions.
of it? I wanna know.
Yes.
And they actually reached in and they took out the heart.
Well, that is, we're getting off subject, but that is actually, that is what they say that the Incans did down in South America.
Yeah.
The Mayans.
I
you
didn't
know,
mean to get off, but the reason I brought it up was it's all like this lore. We're talking about
Right.
lore of Judaism, but somehow that lore is connected with a legend which was originally a practice somewhere, and it became a legend
It
of
was.
Judaism, and it just seems that I come across different things in Judaism that the legends relate to some practice that actually was, not necessarily in Judaism.
Right.
So it's interesting how those legends develop.
Well, you know, we're all citizens of the world, and even though there's different cultures all around the world, we do take and borrow and use from all cultures all around the world, and yes. And also I think that in very ancient times, Canaanite pagan religions also might have done human sacrifice with the heart, so it's not, the ideas maybe are not like, and Isaac was going to be sacrificed, he wasn't in the end. But it is true that all of these stories have connections, and you can see parallels from earlier stories, later stories, but these are the stories of the Baal Shem Tov. Okay? So,
They have cults in America, sick people that have done it in this country.
that's right, there's sick people who've done it in this country, that's for sure. So, here we have the Baal Shem Tov, who's considered a simpleton. He's the teacher's aide. He's not too smart. His job is to walk with the children. And inside, though, the Baal Shem Tov is this shining, incredible soul, a special soul that was sent down from heaven. And the legend goes that there is a small group of 36 souls who, when God created the world out of chaos, ran away and hid in a corner of the chaos because they knew that Adam was going to sin in the Garden of Eden, and they didn't want any part of it. And so those 36 souls ran away and hid, and consequently they are pure. And in every generation, a manifestation of those souls can be found on earth, and they're known as the righteous ones. So the Baal Shem Tov was one of those righteous ones. Elijah himself told his father, you're going to have a son who's a righteous one. Well, there was another one, and these people are called tzaddikim. Tzedek means, it means justice in its purest translation, and it means the just ones, or the very wise ones. So somebody who is a tzaddik is somebody who is very wise, very just, very holy, and the tzaddikim is the plural of that, the group. In Hebrew, you say im if it's a male plural, or ot if it's a female plural, and tzaddikim is the male plural of a tzaddik, of a tzaddik. So while Yisroel is a young boy and he's considered a simpleton, at night, after everyone would go to bed, he would stay up all night long and study Torah. And the story goes that he didn't even need a light. You know, they didn't have electricity. He didn't even need a lamp, that the pureness of his soul would radiate enough light for him to be able to see at night to study Torah. And that Torah for him was like water. It was, he absorbed all of it, and he was an incredible Torah scholar, even though outwardly people thought that he was a simpleton. Well, in a town neighboring, a few miles away, there was another tzaddik who lived, whose name was Rabbi Adam. Now, Rabbi Adam was growing old, and he had a son who was a very learned young man also, but his son was not a tzaddik. And Rabbi Adam was in possession of a very special book. In fact, it's a book that was known as the Book of Adam, which only only 7 people, or it might be 8 people, have had in time. Let me see who it was. So first was Adam, then was Noah, then Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then Rabbi Adam, and so Yisroel was going to be the 7th one to have the book. And Rabbi Adam received this book specially in a vision, where in the night he was sleeping and he had a vision which took him to the cave of the Machpelah. The cave of the Machpelah is the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, and Leah. And he went through this cave, which was in the Carpathian Mountains, but it really took him to the Holy Land. He went through this cave, which the other side of the cave was in the Holy Land. And in the depths of that cave, he was given this Book of Adam, which was a Kabbalistic work that only these 6 people, him and the people before him, had ever had. So, what's the Kabbalah? You know?
Mystical writing. Well, that is the traditional thing about the Kabbalah. It's the body of Jewish mysticism. It was cataloged and written down, started with Isaac. We're going to go into this next week, actually, a little more Kabbalah, but just briefly, by Isaac Luria in the Holy Land. And so the Kabbalah, being the book of Jewish mysticism, it was supposed to only be studied by people who are older than 40, and of course you had to be a man, but nowadays that's all very changed. But in those days it was. But Rabbi Adam had this special book of Adam that was a Kabbalistic work that only Adam, Noah, Abraham, and the other patriarchs had before him. So he was nearing the end of his days, and he had to pass on the book to the next person. So who did he searched his soul, and he knew it wasn't his son who should get the book, and he decided that it should go to, or God had the vision that it was to go to Israel ben Eliezer. So he said on his deathbed, he asked his son. He gave his son the book, and he said, "Listen, this is a very special book. It's not for you. You can't read it. Don't even open it. But you have to go over to this neighboring village." By that time, he moved around, so I think it was Brody was the village where he was at the time. Go over there to Brody, find Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer, and you give him this book. So sadly, Rabbi Adam died, and his son went to go find Rabbi Yisrael over in Brody. So he goes over there and he's asking in all the synagogues, where's Rabbi Yisrael? Nobody heard of him. Nobody heard of Rabbi Yisrael ben Eliezer. Couldn't find him. Rabbi Adam's son was staying in the synagogue and praying, and he noticed the simpleton who was sleeping in the row in the back. And he asked him, do you mind, I'm going to stay late tonight and study it? And Yisrael said, sure, no problem. And his job was to sweep up the synagogue and all that. And of course, the Rabbi Adam's son, was studying, and he got tired and fell asleep. And after he fell asleep at his books was when Yisrael ben Eliezer got up and started studying. And of course, Rabbi Adam's son wakes up, sees Yisrael ben Eliezer studying, sees this light emanating from him, and realizes this is the one who's supposed to get the book. So, as daylight comes, Yisrael falls back asleep, goes to sleep on his bench in the synagogue, and Rabbi Adam's son comes and puts the book on his chest.
And when Yisrael wakes up and finds this book, he opens it and immediately is overcome with the light of the Spirit of God. And Rabbi Adam's son says, "Let me be your disciple." And they start learning and studying together. And eventually they leave the town to become kind of hermits and study together in the forest. And they stay out there for a year studying and learning. And eventually, unfortunately, Rabbi Adam's son dies because he wants to know the knowledge in the book so much that he opens it and ends up dying. So meanwhile, our Yisrael ben Eliezer is living in the forest by himself, a hermit, and he's studying and learning and wandering in the woods, and he comes across an old Jewish farmer who says, "What are you doing out here all by yourself? It's not good. You have to come be with people." He says, "Here, marry my daughter," and Yeah. So he married the farmer's daughter, and they were happy for a year or so, but then she died after only a year of marriage. And at that point, Yisrael decided, you know what, I've been out here long enough, it's time to go back to the village. And he went back to the village and he took a job again as like kind of the caretaker of the synagogue. He did not reveal his intelligence, and he studied secretly at night. But his intelligence did come to the attention eventually of the rabbi of the village, who recognized in him that great intelligence. And that rabbi, whose name was, Rabbi Ephraim of Brody. Is he the one who gave him his daughter, or was Rabbi Hirsch? Okay. So he Leah Rachel, that's right. So good. I gave you the handout for a reason. So when I forget what I'm trying to teach you, I got to remember some of your. So he is working in the synagogue, and he had already his power was showing, and some great powers are assigned to him even at that young age. There's a story that says he had driven the rabbi's wife to the next town to go shopping or something. So he was driving the cart, and on the road they were held up by highwaymen, and using only just the uttering of the words, of some magical words, the highwayman was engulfed and buried alive and wasn't able to hurt them. And the rabbi's wife saw all of this, and he said to her, "Don't tell anybody," but I don't know if she could have kept that kind of secret, but at any rate, her husband eventually discovered his intelligence and made a promise that his daughter would marry Yisrael ben Eliezer. So he's kind of working as a young apprentice rabbi, and he's betrothed to her, but then Rabbi Hirsch or Rabbi Ephraim? Rabbi Ephraim died, and leaving this marriage contract. And when Rabbi Ephraim died, again, Yisrael decides, you know what, I'm going to go off and do some learning on my own. And he went off again, and he's keeping his identity secret. And finally, he decides after a while that he's going to go and claim his bride. He's ready to claim his bride. And he goes, but he dresses himself like a peasant. And he goes into the brother of the bride, whose name was Rabbi Gershon. And he says, "I'm here to claim my bride, your sister. I have a marriage contract from your father." And Rabbi Gershon sees Yisrael ben Eliezer, and he's looking like a schlump, like a peasant. And he said, you can't marry my sister. How can my father, give my sister in marriage to a guy like you? She needs a Torah scholar. But Leah Rachel came down, saw Yisrael, and said, "Oh, that's my husband. My father said to marry him, I'm going to marry him." Her brother said, "No, you can't. We'll break it. Daddy's gone. He won't know." She said, "No, that's it. We're marrying." And she married Yisrael. And Rabbi Gershon was very worried about this. He took his responsibility to his sister very seriously, and he was worried, how is this Shlemiel going to make a living? So he set them up in an inn far away from him. He didn't want to be any, he couldn't stand, Gershon could not stand Israel, his brother-in-law, so he set them up in an inn far away, and they did pretty well. He would, Israel would study, they would run the inn, travelers would come by, and they weren't rich, but they were able to survive. And one day, Gershon was wondering about his sister, and he sent a friend of his, go check on my sister. His name was Reb David. He said, go over there, stay in the inn, check on my sister, see how she's doing with that guy over there. I can't stand him. So Reb David goes, he stays overnight in the inn, and of course, Yisrael treats him like a king, makes him the a chicken and a nice dinner, and gives him the best bed. And at night, as is his custom, while he's studying, his light is glowing. And the light wakes up Reb David, and Reb David thinks that the house is on fire. And he goes around saying, the house is on fire, the house is on fire. But then he realizes it's not on fire. It's Reb Yisrael studying Torah, and this holy light is emanating from him, revealing him to be a true holy man. And so Reb David goes back to Gershon and says, your brother-in-law is not what he seems. He's holier than you. And Reb Gershon laughs and says, yeah, right. But in the end, after when Yisrael was 36 years old, God finally says to him, now is the time to reveal yourself, that you are the Baal Shem Tov and a holy man. So at that time, he goes back to the village with his wife, Leah Rachel, and very quickly, because of his method of instilling joy into Judaism, he starts to grow a large following. And before you know it, he has a large following that exceeds even Rabbi Gershon's synagogue. He's got more congregants than Rabbi Gershon. That must have been fun in its day too. And people start really following the Reb Yisrael ben Eliezer, and he is revealed to be the Baal Shem Tov, the holy master of the name. So more and more people are coming to him. They want to hear his stories, and he teaches through the method of storytelling. So I want to read you one of his stories. This is the way the Baal Shem Tov taught. And of course, this is folklore and legend, so this is one of the Baal Shem Tov's legends. Rabbi Israel and the Sorcerer. The story of the terrible struggle between Rabbi Israel, master of the holy name, and the parrots who was in league with the evil one, and how Rabbi Israel conquered. This is a translation by Meyer Levin, and it's translated very directly from the Yiddish, so the English is a little bit archaic sounding. Anybody know what a parrots was? Parrots was the local governor, ruler of the town, the one who was in charge of the town. Okay. And usually not Jewish, one. Once when he was riding on a journey, Rabbi Israel passed a certain tavern. Although the sun was still strong in the sky, the Baal Shem Tov said, we will stop at this place tonight. The horses were turned around, the wagon drove into the spacious yard, the master descended and went straight into the house. It looked to be a prosperous inn serving the village of the generous parrots whose lands were fat and whose peasants drank well. Let us enter, said Rabbi Israel, and his students followed him. In the first room they saw a long table on which there stood a great many bottles of fine wine. No one was in the room. It smells of a feast, said Reb Wolf. We are just in time to celebrate a bris, a circumcision, said the master. They went into the next room, and there they saw another table covered by a fine white cloth, and on this table were plates of roasted chicken, cakes, and all sorts of delicacies. On a wide chair behind the table lay an embroidered coverlet and linen ready for the circumcision, and there was no one in this room. And in the third room they found the innkeeper sitting beside a small coffin. The innkeeper sat with his head bowed in his great thick hands, and he stared into the tiny coffin. The coffin was empty. The Baal Shem Tov said, it seems you are preparing for a feast tonight, my friend. The innkeeper sighed. Is the child your son? Said the Baal Shem Tov. The innkeeper heavily nodded his head. Your only son? My third son, and yet my only son, said the innkeeper, and with this one it will be as with the others. But this is a feast day for you, said the Baal Shem Tov. You should be merry. Let me help at the circumcision. Let me be the one to hold the child in my arms while it is offered for the rite. Willingly, master, said the innkeeper, for he saw that he spoke to a holy man. It will be a great honor. But his voice was without joy. He looked into the coffin and said, Twice before I have had a son born to me, and each time on the night of the circumcision we found the child dead. With this one it will be as with the others. Have you any enemies? Asked the master. They are all good people around here, said the innkeeper. Do you owe your parents money? The parents is a fine nobleman and very generous. Each time I have a bris, he sends me bottles of rare wine out of his own cellars, and he himself comes to feast and watches the circumcision. See, today he already sent many excellent bottles of wine. No, I have no enemies. Don't hold the circumcision tonight, said the Baal Shem Tov, but tomorrow night. Now let me see your son. The landlord led the master up a stairway and through a hall until they came to a heavily bolted door. In the center of darkness, they saw the shape of a little old grandmother sitting rocking a wooden cradle. When she heard the people coming into the room, she spread her arms frightened over the cradle. I brought you a holy man, said the innkeeper. The face of the child was covered with a prayer shawl. Why is the face of the child hidden? Asked the Baal Shem Tov. So that no evil eye may fall upon it, said the innkeeper. Then he lifted away the tallit, and in the light that streamed through the cracks of the wall, they saw the face of a beautiful child. He will be a learned rabbi, said the master. The hands of the innkeeper trembled, and he said, May God grant that it be so. The rabbi said to him, I will tell you what to do, and you must do exactly as I say. Take the tallis from the face of the child, leave it on his breast, take away the darkness, and put candles in the room and keep them lighted. Then call 2 young students of the Torah and set them here to watch by your son throughout the entire night. They must watch that the candles are not extinguished. Let the students take a sack and hang the sack with its mouth open behind the head of the child. If anything falls into the sack, they must close and bind it quickly. One of them will watch the sack and the other will run and call me. As the master ordered, so everything was done. The circumcision was put off until the next day. Soon night came, and all those in the tavern went to sleep. Only in the room where the child slept, many candles burned, and 2 scholars sat by the cradle studying the Torah. Deep into the night, a wind seemed to come from all around them. It made no sounds, but it came into the room from all sides, chill as a moonlit stove. The light sank fainting, and the flames fell and struggled to rise, and fell and grew grossly pale. The 2 students leaped up and hovered over the candle. The students bent anxiously over the candle, did not notice that the cat had come into the room. Silent as the wind, it glided about the walls. Its eyes shone and glittered with whiteness, but they were not as white as the radiant face of the sleeping infant, who was already filled with the light of coming wisdom and holiness. The cat crept all around the room, turning always nearer to the child in the cradle, and twisted his way to the path of the wind on the sand. It came near to the cradle and crouched ready to spring, and cold fire came out of its eyes. The flame of the candle shrank low like backs behind beaten under whips. The cat sprang, but when its eyes encountered the light on the face of the sleeping child, it was as if the cat had been stricken backward in mid-air, and it fell heavily into the open sack. The students started at the thud. Instantly, they remembered the command of the master. One of them seized the mouth of the sack, twisted it tight, and tied it close, and the other ran and called the Baal Shem Tov. The cat rolled and struggled and clawed. When the Baal Shem Tov came into the chambers, the lights rose again and flamed steadily. The cat ceased to jump upward and lay in a jerking heap at the bottom of the bag. The Baal Shem Tov felt the sack and began to laugh softly. Bring me a stick, he said. They ran and brought him a heavy stick, and he took the stick and began to beat the cat in the bag. The cat howled, the Baal Shem Tov laughed and belabored the sack with all his might. And beat it with all his might. What was in the sack ceased to jump and to struggle, and it lay still. The Baal Shem Tov said, "Open the window." Then he unbound the sack and went to the window and shook it out, and they all heard the cat fall to the ground. It crept away on its belly. The next day the innkeeper made a great feast than he had ever made before. He celebrated the circumcision of his sons. Musicians came, and Jewish families for miles around came to be joyous. The Baal Shem Tov held the child in his arms, and the child was circumcised. In the midst of the festival, the innkeeper said, "It's strange that the parrots has not come to the tavern. Every other time he came to wish the child good luck." Then Yashka, a peasant who worked in the house of the parrot, said, "The parrot is sick today." The Baal Shem Tov laughed softly to himself. And the innkeeper said to his wife, "We will send a honey cake to the parrots and tell him of the bris of our son." So they took a large honey cake and wrapped it in fine white cloth. The Baal Shem Tov said to the innkeeper, "Do me a favor, let me carry the cake to the parrots." "With the best of my heart," said the innkeeper, and he gave the present to the master. The master went with the cake and came to the great dwelling of the parrots. He was led to a spacious hall, and at the end of the bed lay the parrots. His arms were covered with bandages, and the flesh of all his face was blue. "I have brought you a honey cake, your excellency," said the Baal Shem Tov. Then they looked into each other's eyes. The eyes of the parrots became white and cold and glinted like pieces of ice. Then the parrot said, "Well, you gave me a good beating." Rabbi Israel became stern and said, "The innkeeper is an honest man and serves you well. You have no right to persecute him. He is a Jew," said the parrots. "From now on," declared the Baal Shem Tov, "know that he is protected by a power greater than your power." So obviously the parrots were the sorcerer. As I said, the name of the story is Rabbi Israel or the sorcerer. He turned himself into a cat, and he went into the infant's room with his intention was to kill the infant. Why? Simply because he was a Jew. The Baal Shem Tov captured him and beat him with a stick and defeated him in that instance. And the story goes on to say that the sorcerer challenges the Baal Shem Tov to a kind of a magician's duel. Shades of Sword in the Stone, right? Or Pesach. Pesach, right? Good. That's I had love Pesach. But exactly like Passover with Moses and Aaron doing works of wonder. So the sorcerer challenges the Baal Shem Tov to a magical duel. The Baal Shem Tov comes with his students. In a month, he gives the sorcerer time to recover from his beating. Comes back in a month, and the sorcerer throws everything at him that he can, wild beasts and all kinds of monsters and scary things. And of course, the Baal Shem Tov, just with uttering the name, the magical words, is able to soundly defeat the sorcerer, just like Moses and Aaron defeated Pharaoh's sorcerers. And I'm surprised I didn't see that. I'm like, wow, that's great. So, yeah, because that's exactly what it is. So another parallel from a story in the Torah. And in the end, who are the victors? The Baal Shem Tov, but also who else? The Jewish people, right? So this story was a parable, really a parable about a time when the Jewish people were living in Eastern Europe, were severely persecuted, were very often beaten in pogroms and other acts of aggression and violence. And in the end, the magic of faith was a power that was greater than the evil of the sorcerer. And so the Jewish people, through the Baal Shem Tov, were able to defeat that evil and show that true faith and belief and faith in God was going to conquer the evil of the sorcerer, aka anti-Semitism, and the evil of their neighbors who regularly attack them. Questions?
Do the Hasidic people consider the Baal Shem Tov the originator of Hasidism?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do the Hasidic people recognize him as the
Oh yes,
originator?
oh yes. Hasidic people revere the Baal Shem Tov as the originator of their sect of Judaism, and there's a famous saying that Hasidic people use about the Baal Shem Tov, and one is that you have to be a fool to the saying is you have to be a fool to believe all these stories about the Baal Shem Tov, but you have to be a fool not to believe them. So they do, in this kind of practice, in a practice of a kind of a mystical, spiritual practice, people do see magic, and in this kind of Judaism and in Kabbalah, there is magic that comes into play. And part of that, and according to the Hasidic movement, the magic is actually, it's not really so much magic as it is the channeling of God's energy and light throughout the world. So, it's not of course it's supernatural, but it's not, it's the channeling of God's light, which is in every living thing all throughout the world. So, just in closing, I want to tell you how, what happened to the Book of Mysteries, the Book of Adam, that Rabbi Adam gave to the Baal Shem Tov. So, all the knowledge of power that the Baal Shem Tov ever possessed was contained in the secret book that he received from Rabbi Adam. After Baal Shem Tov had returned from his journey to the ancient land, he prepared for his journey to eternity. And I skipped over a lot of places. There's a lot of stories about how the Baal Shem Tov traveled to heaven, traveled to the Holy Land, all through magical ways. Then Rabbi Adam came down to the Baal Shem Tov and says, "You have no more need of this book. The book is in your heart." Rabbi Israel asked, "Who shall have it after me?" That was the Book of Mysteries that had been given to only 7. It was given to Adam and to Abraham, to Joseph and Joshua ben Nun, not Noah, I'm sorry, I was wrong, to Solomon, I missed Solomon, and Rabbi Adam, and to Rabbi Israel, son of Eliezer. And the 8th one to possess the book of wisdom shall be the Messiah, the son of David. The Baal Shem Tov and Rabbi Adam went up into the mountains, and they found a great stone. Rabbi Adam touched the stone. Remember, Rabbi Adam was dead. He came back to do this with Rabbi Israel. Rabbi Adam touched the stone, and the stone split open. Within the stone, Rabbi Israel placed the book of wisdom, and he touched the stone, and the stone closed. So until this day, the book of wisdom is hidden in the stone, which we know has all kinds of other parallels to stories and tales and things from the Torah that we can think about.
What's the name of that book that you have, that book of wisdom?
What?
What's the name of that?
Oh, this is called Hasidic Stories. It's a translation of Hasidic Stories by Meyer Levin.
And it's in print.
It might be out of print by now. It's a pretty old book. 1932, and the last printing was 1975.
Oh, it's 75?
Yeah. This is a 1975 printing. I'm sure it's not 1932.
What is in this book of Adam? Never
We don't
heard of it
know.
or
Only
never-
Rabbi Israel knows. He's the one who, he's a pure enough soul to handle it.
So the Baal Shem Tov is the father of Hasidism, but is he also considered like the father or founder of Kabbalah?
No.
Or
Kabbalah was, we're gonna talk about Kabbalah next week. I am not an expert on Kabbalah, so I've been
very
studying
different.
about it enough to teach you a little bit, just a very basics for next week. But he was not the founder of Kabbalah, but he was a Kabbalist. In other words, he did read the books of Kabbalah and follow them and believe in them. Yeah, Isaac Gloria was.
Safed, S-A-F-E-D, is that where Kabbalah began?
Yes. And
How do you say that?
in Hebrew, it's pronounced Sfat. Sfat. It's a city in Israel that still exists today. So we'll learn about that next week. Meanwhile, have a great week and a